What if the story of Atlantis isn't a myth, but a memory? And what if for centuries we've been looking on the wrong side of the world? What if the greatest lost civilization in history wasn't in the Atlantic at all, but drowned beneath the shallow seas of a forgotten continent? For most of us, the story of Atlantis is pure fantasy, a beautiful parable told by the Greek philosopher Plato about a magnificent island civilization that angered the gods and was swallowed by the sea in a single terrible day and night. It's a great story, but that's all it is, right? Well, maybe not. Today, we're going on a journey to a place that doesn't exist on any modern map. We're going to look at hard geological science, ancient universal myths, and controversial underwater discoveries that all point to one mind-bending conclusion. The legend of a great lost civilization might be the ghost of a real place. And its name is Sundaland. First, let's talk about what we know is true. This isn't speculation. This is science. Around 20,000 years ago, during the peak of the last ice age, our planet looked very different. So much of the world's water was locked up in massive, miles-thick ice sheets that sea levels were almost 400 feet. That's 120 meters lower than they are today. And in Southeast Asia, this exposed a colossal landmass, a continent twice the size of India, connecting what are now the scattered islands of Sumatra, Java, and Borneo into a single contiguous whole. Geologists call it Sundaland. Imagine it, not a barren wasteland, but a tropical paradise. A vast plain crisscrossed by enormous river systems, a haven for megafauna like giant elephants and tigers, and most importantly for people. It would have been one of the most resource-rich and hospitable places on Earth for our ancient ancestors to thrive. A cradle of civilization just waiting to blossom. But then the world started to warm up. The great ice sheets began to melt, and for the people living on Sundaland, the world began to end. This wasn't a single tidal wave like in the movies. It was a slow-motion apocalypse that unfolded over thousands of years. Generation after generation would have watched the sea just creep inwards. Coastlines they knew would vanish. Villages their grandparents lived in would become seafloors. Entire hunting grounds, sacred sites, an entire world, slowly but relentlessly erased from the map. By about 7,000 years ago, Sundaland was gone, leaving only its highest mountain peaks behind, which we now know as the islands of Indonesia and Malaysia. This isn't theory, it's a geological fact. A vast continent, teeming with life, was swallowed by the rising seas, the single greatest displacement of human populations in prehistory. An event like that, it doesn't just disappear. It leaves an echo, a scar, not just on the ocean floor, but in our collective memory. And that brings us to the stories. Almost every culture on Earth has a great flood myth. We all know the story of Noah's Ark, the Epic of Gilgamesh, but we tend to think of them as separate, regional tales. But what if they're not? Let's look at the cultures that live on the shoreline of that drowned continent. The indigenous peoples of Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Borneo, even the Aboriginal tribes of northern Australia. When you study their oldest oral traditions, an uncanny pattern emerges. It's what some researchers call the chorus of floods. Story after story tells of a time when the land was vast and whole, before a catastrophic flood, sent either as punishment or as part of a great cosmic cycle, drowned the world, forcing a few chosen ancestors to flee to the high ground, to the mountains in boats. From them, humanity was born anew. Is it really a coincidence that dozens of cultures, separated by seas but all surrounding this drowned landmass, tell the exact same story? Or are they all distant echoes of a single, shared historical trauma? The memory of watching their entire world, Sundaland, sink beneath the waves. The story of Atlantis isn't about an island that sank in a day, but a continent that drowned over millennia. Okay, so we have a real drowned continent and a chorus of myths that seem to remember it. But that's not enough, right? Where's the physical proof? Where are the ruins? Well, this is where things get really tantalizing and very controversial. First, let's travel to the waters off the coast of Japan, to a site known as the Yonaguni Monument. Submerged under 80 feet of water lies a massive stone structure, the size of a pyramid. It features enormous flat terraces, gigantic steps, and what look like carved 90-degree angles. Mainstream geology insists it's a bizarre but completely natural rock formation. But many, including the marine geologist who discovered it, are convinced it's artificial. They argue that the sharp, precise features are simply not found in nature. Could it be a mountaintop temple from a coastal civilization that was submerged when the seas rose? And then there's Gunung Padang, back in Indonesia. On the surface, it looks like a hill covered in ancient, scattered megalithic columns. For years, it was considered a simple sacred site, but recent, controversial, ground-penetrating radar surveys suggest something astonishing, that the hill itself is artificial, that it's a massive, multi-layered pyramid buried under thousands of years of soil. Core drilling has pulled up organic material from deep within the structure that has been carbon dated to be over 25,000 years old. Now, that date is hugely debated, and it would completely upend our entire understanding of prehistory. But if it's even remotely true, it means a sophisticated culture, capable of building massive structures, existed in this region during the Ice Age, right on the highlands of what was then Sundaland. So how could this world-changing story have possibly traveled from Southeast Asia all the way to Plato in Greece? The answer might be simpler than you think: the sea. We often think of the ancient world as disconnected, but it wasn't. Maritime trade routes are thousands of years older than we traditionally believe. Long before the Silk Road, there was a spice route. Sailors from ancient India, Persia, and Arabia were masters of the sea. Stories traveled just as easily as goods. A sailor's tale told in a port in Egypt about a legendary motherland of civilization in the East that was lost to the sea could easily be passed on, a story evolving with each telling, traveling across the ancient world until it eventually reached the ears of scholars in Greece. The history we are taught is only a fraction of the story. If you believe there are deeper truths to uncover, subscribe for more journeys into the past's greatest secrets. What is your theory? Is Sundaland the real Atlantis or just a fascinating coincidence? Share your thoughts in the comments below.